Let me first introduce myself. My name is Nargiz. I'm a third-year history major student. I'm also pursuing minor in anthropology. So yes, it's not a lot of students from our, let's say, program, but still we are trying to popularize history in our university. And I'm glad you're also here to learn something, how methodically our science is working, let's say. Yes, and as for the context, I have written in independent research this summer, and these are like the main tips that I'm trying to will try to teach you today, and I find them quite useful. You can also try to experiment with them, see whether they work or not. Yes. And also, before we start, I would like to mention that the 3 most active students today will receive merge from our academic advice office. Yes. So, can you see my screen?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. So, in order to read history and kind of get into it, there are 2 main of materials that you should know. So the first one is primary sources, and the second one is secondary sources. And saying briefly, primary sources are materials produced by people or groups directly involved in the event. And secondary sources are written or created by people who were not eyewitnesses to the events. So, for example, let's say that you're living in the 1940s and you're a soldier, and you were sent to fight with somebody, and you're writing a diary. And this diary you're writing would be primary sources because you were a direct witness to these events. But and let's say that 80 years later, there was some kind of a historian, and he takes your diary and analyzes it, tries to deduct why were you writing that way, what were you thinking about. This would be secondary sources. And here's the quick exercise for you. You can either type in the chat or say it out loud. So there are different types of sources, and you have to deduct whether those are primary or secondary sources. So the first one is letters. Letters like pisma. Yes. Do you think those are primary or secondary? Yes, it is primary. Thank you. Diaries. Diaries are also primary. Thank you. Academic articles. What do you think? Secondary. Yes, secondary. Yes, it's quite easy. Speeches. Primary. Yes, true. Autobiographies. Primary, secondary. So it's not quite clear whether autobiographies are primary or secondary, but I would guess that those are primary because let's say you are Tolstoy and you have written about your life, and those works were published for other people to read, get to know you, and those are primary sources. Yeah, and they are quite useful actually. Treaties. Treaties are like договоры in Russian. Treaties and census data are primary. Yes, it is true. So yeah. So next, marriage, birth, and death registers. Sorry. Primary. Yes, it is true. Primary. Documentary films. What do you think? secondary. Yes, those are true because we are taking some material that was produced in the past and we are analyzing it in the present. Textbooks, yes, secondary. It is true. These textbooks and dissertations are secondary. Yes, it is true. Works of art, films, and recordings. Yes, those are mainly, I would guess, primary because they are they were produced in the past. So, and you are trying to analyze them in the present. And yeah, also to note, second primary materials could be also like in the form of text written, or they could be like touched. So how to say it properly? То есть осязаемые, нет, не осязаемые, ну то, что можно, в общем, потрогать. Works of art, yes. And next, items of clothing, household objects and tools. Yeah, primary. And to note also, some of those material objects, they are kind of in between history and archaeology, you could say, because archaeologists are also analyzing those objects. Next, opinion letters. Some are saying that those are primary, but I guess it is kind of tricky because you have to note when those opinion letters were produced. If they were made by somebody in the past, directly involved in the event, so yeah, of course they are primary, but if not, they are secondary. So they could be both of them. Next, archaeological remains. Yeah, as I said, those are primary. And next, oral interviews from witnesses. Primary. Yeah, some people may argue that those are not technically primary because there's a third party involved in this person is a historian, is taking interview from the witness, but those are considered primary usually. Yeah. Next. So when you're trying to analyze primary sources, there's a list of useful questions that you can keep in mind. So what I advise usually is not to approach reading in the passive manner. So while reading, you can know something for yourself. Know something for yourself, and yeah, analyze it in the process. So you can kind of start from simple questions and general ones. Who is the author? When was it composed? And next, you can also ask who was the intended audience. Let's say, for example, that you are Russian imperial ethnographer, and you were sent to study Kazakh steppes. And often in those cases, you would write to your imperial office located in Russia. So the person, those ethnographers, would use some kind of specific language, refer to people in the like higher posts, for example, Empress, Ее Величество, and etc. What is the purpose of the source? And it is also quite arguable because in some cases, for example, let's say letters, you can usually deduct what kind of opinion an author has. But in other cases, for example, census data or treaties, those are purely factual. Yeah. And what is the historical context in which source was written and read? So let's say that you are an ethnographer, but in that time, Russia started a war with somebody, and these events would usually also be seen in your writings. And how do the author's gender and socioeconomic class compare to those of the people about whom he or she is writing? So also when you read those letters by ethnographers, they can say that, for example, those people that are live in steppes, they're nomadic, and they do not have some European values, and they are not showing like a progress, and they're not technically progressive or etc. And your your class would usually and your origin usually would be seen in those kind of discussions. And so yeah, but biases are usually deductible, as I said. And what was the original text commissioned by anyone or published by a press? So sometimes when you're, for example, sending your letters to some kind of journal or magazine, those journals and magazines usually have some kind of a central topic that they're trying to preach or show to their audience. And this choice is also quite prominent. You have to keep it in mind. And also the last question is quite interesting. So let's say that you experience war and the Soviet newsletters described the war in some particular way, but 80 years later, somebody have taken interview from you and you described it in another way. So you can kind of compare what was said in the past and what have you experienced and actually. And here's a good example, and it kind of describes the case about Napoleon and Sheikh El-Miziri in 1789. So you can read it. Napoleon expressed the hope that the Sheikh will soon establish a government in Egypt based on the principles of the Quran, the sacred text of Islam. And in this case, you cannot directly say that Napoleon actually believed in Islam or or read it in some way or respected it, but you have to go deeper and kind of inspect the issue from every side possible. So you can take, for example, the historical context in which Napoleon entered Egypt. So in that time, in particular, there was kind of imperial quest to get all of those territories to France and their colonies, and potentially one of the way would be to kind of analyze whether this phrase that he said about Quran and his respect to it would help him to kind of establish his power in that region. That's really what I'm guessing here. And the question is, under what circumstances did Napoleon write this letter? Who was Sheikh El-Miziri? And what was his relationship to Napoleon? So yeah, basically, those questions that are written here can kind of introduce you to the topic and see it more critically. And next. Give me a second, please. I will send you one file. Now we will analyze a quick, like, basically have a quick exercise. and I will send you a PDF file so we can look at it together. You can see it in the chat. Yes. So here's a list of tips that I'm suggesting you to use while reading primary documents. So first, you have to start by scanning the document. So let's say that you are a student and you have been assigned to read a particular document. I've taken this document about Giuliani from History of Kazakhstan course. And yeah, in the first week, I think it was. And so here you can see your source, and you don't really know how to approach it. My first suggestion is kind of basically just go through it and see what kind of section does it have, what is written here, basically. So,
Sorry.
yes, please ask.
I can't see the file.
I'm sorry, but we cannot access the file. There is no
Oh,
file in the chat
sorry.
box.
Oh,
Sorry
wait a
to disturb
second.
you.
Can you download it? Why does it not?
I sent it again. Please check it if you can download it now. Do you see the file? It says that it was sent successfully.
No.
No file in the chat. Okay, then Nargiz, please share the screen. I don't know, just for some reason, some students can access it, others are not. I downloaded it successfully, but
Maybe they are sitting from phones. I guess.
yeah, perhaps. Could you
But
please
okay.
share the screen?
And can you see the file?
Yes, thank you.
A PDF file. Okay, good. So my first suggestion is just basically go through it and see what kind of interesting elements I guess the file has. So there's a title, and the document was basically kind of I guess distributed to several sections. So here's the first excerpt, and then you have questions, and the second one also with questions. So okay, and in the first part, you can also see a small summary about the text and the author. And my second tip is to focus on the questions under each excerpt, analyze them carefully, keep general questions in mind. So sometimes, especially if you're taking introductory courses as like history of Kazakhstan, you will have those questions at the end. And I greatly suggest you to focus on them. And also sometimes professor can send you useful questions beforehand, so you can keep them in mind and kind of keep see for certain elements in the text and important important paragraph or ideas relevant to the course. And here's two questions. The first talks about methods that Giuliani employs to portray Genghis Khan as a great ruler, and the second one talks about how Giuliani was writing specifically for Muslim audience, and why was it so useful and significant to this discourse. And what you can do here is basically have a quick exercise and highlight important words, or maybe kind of take a more critical approach to questions and see whether what specifically does the question ask from you. For example, what matters here? The maybe professor is most likely asking you to list maybe several reasons, and especially why Chinggis Khan was a great ruler. And yeah, and in the second question, the author wants to mainly highlight why was Giuliani taking such a specific look on the Muslim audience, specific focus, and why was it important? Yes. My third suggestion is to then read the summary at the beginning of the document, highlight important points related to the context. So basically, especially when you're taking History 101, the authors have already made a summary for you, and usually it contains the main ideas about the person, and also gives you some kind of context to the excerpts that you will later read in the document. So, for example, here we can see that Giuliani was a prototypical example of the role performed by Persian scribe within the Mongol Empire. And here it is important to know that he had some kind of a prominent position, and he was basically a person who had power, and his family also had power previously by writing those descriptions about the rulers and Persia. Sorry. And also later, those Persian territories were taken by the Mongol Empire. So it is an important context here. And secondly, you can see that Giuliani was also Muslim due to his origin. And here it was reported that he said those like famous words, "All people know that you have committed great sins," etc. And also at the end, here's a quick like summary of the important documents. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that you have to keep a more specific or kind of focused approach to those summaries, because they usually highlight the main points that the author will try to teach you, I guess, and see whether you can keep up the discussion around them. And then you will be left to read the text. And here I suggest to highlight important moments and make bookmarks if necessary. So if you are reading a PDF file, which I think is the most how to say, practical way to approach this kind of assignments, because first of all, it allows you to have like interesting functions within like those PDF editors. And I have specifically chosen Foxit PDF reader because it allows you to highlight specific points. For example, let's say that you're reading and you have seen a specific moment when the author is talking about Alexander the Great and kind of answers the first question by talking why Chinggis Khan was such a great ruler. And here you can basically highlight your quotes and also save it by using this bookmark. Yes. And when you will later come back to your question, you can easily just, for example, let's say you also bookmark this part and go back to each of these quotes easily. Next, write a quick summary of the question, leave references to pages, copy potential quotes of responses for an essay. So as I said, you can easily save those quotes if you need it. And later you have read your text, and what you also may find useful is coming back to them and leaving like a small answer. So you will not have to come back once again before like your seminar that we usually have on history courses, or when you try to approach your essay, you will already have like the most important points from those texts. And secondly, you will already have your answer, so you will not have to reread the text once again. And let's say that you have read like the first question. And actually, I wanted you guys to practice reading with me, but unfortunately, I guess the file is not working properly today. So here's like a quick summary how I would usually answer to those questions. So, for example, your first question was about Genghis Khan as a ruler, and you don't have to write a lot. So basically, just try to summarize it in one or two maybe sentences. And if needed, you can also paste your quotes here to make your life a bit easier. Because what is also good for you when you're writing your responses, professor usually suggests you to take like I guess to look for evidences, pieces of evidence in the text. So in order to do that, you can also use those quotes, which will make your like position, topic sentence more confident, I guess. And yeah. And the first what I have written, the first answer says that Giuliani highlighted intellect of the ruler, made comparison with Alexander the Great, which we also saved the quote for. And also, in addition, there was a sense of unity and acceptance of different nations under the Yasa. So basically, Giuliani kind of highlights that that Genghis Khan took more like a tolerant approach to ruling, and kind of demonstrating that every nation can safely exist under his rule by simply following the Yasa, which also Yasa was like some like laws in the Quran, where we can kind of connect those two questions. The second question about Muslim cities, Muslim audience. So here, Muslim cities and states were especially cruel, tyrannous, its citizens full of pride. And here, what Giuliani suggests that Genghis Khan actually is some kind of a savior by showing that, oh, we finally freed you from those sins, and he basically came to punish those bad behaviors, sinful behaviors. And furthermore, the question was not in the legitimacy of the ruler, but God. So basically, if you not submit or nor surrender, the ancient God, he will know that you did not do it, and you basically will be still wrong. Because here what Giuliani says that basically like the Muslim god, he specifically choose Genghis Khan, and therefore if you will not follow him, it will also be a sin for you, so for Muslim person. And next, I would like to talk about secondary sources. And here's also a kind of a list that are combined that also would be useful for you while you will be reading those academic sources. And the first question is, who is the author? What are his or her academic credentials? So yeah, usually this information will be available online or in the first pages of a book, etc. And those two questions are kind of similar to what we have talked about in the primary sources. Let's say, for example, that there is a historian and he is writing about the Soviet Union, and you can approach, see his article, and you want to read it, but you didn't check beforehand where did he come from, what was his university, where he's teaching, and what he has written before. And while reading, you see that there are some biases. For example, he tends to highlight how certain rulers were actually good in the Soviet Union, and he demonstrates also some kind of excitement about the topics of Marxism and etc., Leninism, and later, you kind of check on him on the internet and see that he is known to be criticized for having this Marxist bias. So I also suggest you, especially if you want to study those sources for yourself outside the university courses, to kind of be more careful about searching those secondary articles. But usually, if you're taking those history courses in our university, professor will already pre-select you all articles and materials. So yeah, you don't really have to worry about it so much. And next, when was the text written, and what is the political, social, and cultural context in which the source was written? And those questions are also important. Let's say that you want to study Russia in the 1960s, 1970s, and you have found interesting articles that was produced by American historians that studied the Soviet Union. And you kind of read through his text, and you see that he operates on some kind of strange assumption about the Soviet Union. And let's say that he writes that the Soviet people usually ate babies, or they fought a bear in the forest, and you're like, is it really true? And you kind of then think about that period, and you understand that, oh, actually the US and the Soviet Union were in the state of the Cold War at that period. So yeah. It is also useful to know what is the publisher. Is it text published by scholarly press or popular one? So here is also a really interesting point, because not everything about history is written in the academic sources, but it also can be from popular sources. For example, let's say that you I don't know, went to a bookstore, and there was a book written about like medieval times and like Kazakh Khans, and there's not really a lot of references to authors, and you're not really sure on what information and the author was kind of operating his ideas, and those kind of topics or contexts are also crucial for learning and reading secondary source. Who is the intended audience? Okay, but usually the intended audience for secondary sources is a general reading public. And sometimes if a topic is really like specific, let's say the economic state of the Soviet Union, for example, in the period from 1977 to 1982, and you're not really sure how to read it, maybe it was written for some kind of specialist in the field that already know what is deal about the time period. And the last question is kind of the most important, I guess, for students, is to analyze what is the author's main argument or thesis. And when you try to approach on what point the author was creating his thesis, it is also important to look at the references at the end of each article. So by references, there's also there are usually like primary sources and secondary sources that author used to prove his point. And you basically have to check whether those are relevant or not. And yeah, next, so after doesn't consider with others who have written the subjects on. Yeah, so basically be aware what kind of sources the author was using, and whether those sources kind of help him or do not help him to prove a point. So in the previous semester, I took a course about the Soviet Union, and I have written kind of also like a quick summary and analysis of a source. So basically, the source was talking about the period of stagnation in the Brezhnev era, and what the author is saying that there were three different like points or periods in the demographic history of the Soviet Union. The first one was around the 1917th revolution, or the second one was about Stalinist industrialization, and the third one was around like the period of Brezhnev. And in both of those three periods, there was like mass migration from villages to the cities. And the paper kind of tries to analyze who was involved in this third migration, why they left, and what are the consequences for them and those that they left behind. And what the author was trying to talk about was like qualitative side to this process, because he highlights that he doesn't really have a lot of training in the demographic history, but rather he wants to know what were those people moving from villages to cities talking about, thinking about, how were they feeling, and etc. In order to do that, of course, he didn't use only like those census data, but also talked about like diaries and analyzed challenges that those people faced, for example, lack of friends. And also he tried to look at it from like the popular art and culture at the time, such as fiction, proverbs, and chistushki. And next, I would like to share some tips with you how to approach reading secondary sources. So I've also chosen this source from History of Kazakhstan 101. And my first tip is to look through the document, easier if there are titles for each section. Yeah, sometimes, as I said, some documents usually have like titles. For example, here you can see like introduction, next like chin titles for the Kazakhs and relationships. It kind of, when you brush through the text, your brain kind of knows what to expect from reading the text, so it makes your job a bit easier, I guess. And you'll not kind of spend a lot of energy on trying to understand what is happening, because you already know how the text is working, what the author is trying to teach you, and yeah, teach you, sorry, show to you. Keep the general questions in your mind, so try to also actively read based on those questions that I provided before. Next, read the introduction, highlight the main thesis or research question. The important point here is that usually the academic articles, they all operate in the manner where they kind of similar and mirror each other. And usually those especially historical articles have a thesis, and the thesis is kind of located, I guess, within like maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 even pages, first pages of the text. So if you have like introduction section, what I advise you is kind of to mainly read this part, introduction, and check whether the author have showed you the thesis. And some author like do it in a like, I guess, prominent way, where you can see it easily, but others are not really. So I guess it mainly depends on your luck and how you read it. But in the most cases, of course, they provide thesis and the research questions. So the audience to kind of know what to expect next. And I have already found a series, a thesis, and basically it's not really easily detectable. That's sad a bit, but in the introduction, it says that the article is mainly talking about Kazakh sultans and how the Qin court gave them like titles, etc. Why was this important, and what was the position of Russia during this process? Yeah, and when you have found series, it makes kind of your job a bit easier because you already know the main idea of the text. Then I suggest not to read like the rest of the article, but go straight to the conclusion section, because the introduction and conclusion sections, they are really connected to each other. So as you know, the introduction kind of gives you a thesis, a main question, main question, and conclusion sometimes just as directly answers this research question, or it summarizes all the points that the author have made throughout the article. So you also gain some kind of background, and you don't really have to stress that much. And yeah, here you can see that there is a really useful summary from the pages 203 to 204. yeah, let me show it to you. So you have went to the conclusion section and you see a summary. So the summary is enumerated. It's really easy to see what was like the outcome of the situation between like the actions that the source was trying to analyze and highlight to readers. And yeah, now that you have understood what is the main problem that the text solves for you, you can easily just read the other sections and see what how author tries to prove it to you, what evidence he or she uses, and how was like this discussion going, and etc. Next is the rest of the article. In Syria, you can get all information by reading the first and last sentences of each paragraph. So, as you know, if you took the class of rhetoric, sometimes it really depends on the author style of writing, but each paragraph starts with the topic sentence. For example, this chapter will reconsider the chain system of conferring titles from the viewpoint of Kazakh sultans themselves. And what author will try to next is he will try to prove how this like topic sentence works, and what is the reason why author thinks that way. And yeah, and sometimes the last sentence is working as kind of a summary or the connecting sentence between each of the topic sentences, first sentences of each paragraph. And when you have written all the rest of the article, I'm also suggesting you to write a summary with the main points, have useful quotes and references. So you know your thesis, and sometimes not all evidence that the author shows in the text is actually useful to you. And what I recommend is just looking at the main points of the text. And let's say that you're reading and found a useful quote, which kind of summarizes the author's idea. And for example, of course, when Kazakhs require titles from the Chin course, the self-appellation that they requested reflected the organization of Kazakh society to some extent. Great, you have found a useful quote. Now you can highlight it and also save it for yourself. So when you have finished reading your article, you will close it, and at the end of the week, you will come back to this article and write a response to it. So basically, by saving those main points and creating quotes with this bookmark function feature, you save a lot of time for yourself, and you can easily use those quotes to make your argument in the response even stronger. The same is also useful when you're writing essays. So yeah. And here I would like to show you how I usually write summaries for secondary sources. So let me actually show you how I keep my notes for history. So here is like a week, and I divided each week for its context. So content. So it would be lectures usually, and like after you have read your watch your lectures, there would be a secondary source. And what I do is usually use this heading function, feature function, and kind of make a structure for myself where I can easily approach and find every article that that was assigned for me. And then when I finished reading, I just try to find the thesis and copy it directly and leave a quote. Because when you will, for example, when you will be getting ready for your midterm exams, it is quite easy to actually just read this thesis, and you will already understand what you have studied before. And also I just highlight like the main ideas that was presented, and yeah. The same is quite useful when you have found like specifically those sentences, and you can directly just screenshot it like that. So there are already existing apps that can make the screenshotting process a lot easier for you. You just screenshot it and copy it directly to your summary. Yeah. And it just, I guess, makes the whole process a lot easier. Yeah. And that's all that I have for today. Do you have any questions about like making your notes maybe on or other questions on how to read history? Yes, please. Naila?
Yeah, I have a question regarding primary sources. What if you have a primary source that doesn't have any questions to it? So because the Giovanni one that you showed, it was kind of an annotated, which had the questions. But if say you are analyzing a diary and it's simply just a diary and it doesn't have any questions to prompt, do you create your own questions or do you look them up somewhere?
No. As I said, you can just simply keep in mind those questions, those like general questions, because usually when you read a diary, there's already an existing some kind of discourse that the author tries to prove to you. So what you mainly need to do is try to deduct what the author tries to demonstrate to you and how does he do it. And then when you have read like your diary, you can also Google some additional information that can give you like historical context, I guess, and it will just you will already have existing reasons on to know why a certain person was seeking that way. So yeah, you basically kind of you can keep those questions in your mind, and then when you understand what the author tries to prove you, you can already start to generate other questions from these like assumptions. Yeah. I hope that I answered your question. Are there any other questions that you would like to know?
Yeah, thank you for the answer. And also I had a second question about the history sources, because sometimes when you read really old, like 17th century, 16th century sources, oftentimes they would use some words that nowadays have one meaning, but after you look it up, it kind of has a different meaning. Do you actually have to go and choose words that you don't understand for this kind of things, or is you can just go and deduct the meaning?
We have tried to analyze sources similar to what you're talking about or in the history, the text and context course in the previous semester. And what our professor has said is that usually those manuscripts are analyzed by editors, and they will try to deduct each letter and kind of at the end they will have the like the whole text will be ready, and usually other historians will take the text and make some kind of annotations to um, to show what was after meaning, because as you have said, each time period has its own like specific dialect and like yeah, narrative, not narrative, but way of expressing yourself. Yes, Adelia.
Hello, maybe my question will be not about the sources, but I'd like to ask a question about history generally. I am a first year student, so I am a bit like worried about upcoming exam essay. So can you give me any tips how to get prepared for that?
So yeah, as I have shown, I guess that you're taking history of Kazakhstan, right?
Yes, the first 100, I think, course.
Okay. Great. So as I have said, you usually at those like primary documents you have already questions existing, and before a seminar starts, try to kind of use those active reading questions that I have provided, and just briefly answer those questions that are usually located at the end of each excerpt, and it will make your job a bit easier because you will be ready to discuss those moments in your seminars, and also try to create quotes by saving them and also making summaries for each of the document or lecture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please ask.
A bit of random question, but do you sometimes do a background check on the certain words that author uses? So just to explain my situation, I had in the previous semesters this one text and then one history course, and it did have certain so the author of that diary was mentioning some other people, and it was annotated, so editors did give some kind of annotation who this person was, but they were like given really simple 2-3 word annotations about who this person was. Actually check out who this person was and why did he even appear in this paper. And just like a bit of curious question, do you often do that in history courses, or is it usually omitted?
I actually have this problem quite often, to be honest, because especially if you're reading those like old diaries, the words are always like different. They use like specific terms, and what I do is I install for myself a online translator. So let me actually demonstrate it how I usually do it. So let's say that you're reading and you stumbled upon an unknown word, a really specific word. I don't know. Maybe you don't understand this paragraph, or maybe you don't understand this word illustrate. And I have downloaded. I shouldn't do not have it here, but I downloaded an app called a DeepL translator, and it allows you to basically translate words in the document, and you just press Strel, control and C 2 times. And maybe you do not see it. Let me show you.
Yeah, my question is not about unknown words, but about when a certain person is mentioned. So, for example, I had this diary, and in this diary, the author of the diary was mentioning certain people, like actual surnames of those people, and the editors of this translation, because it was a text translated from French, so the editors who did the translations, they did give kind of a note about who is he referring to, but those annotations were like 2-3 word phrases, and at least for me, I had to go up on the internet and search up exactly who this person was and how he relates to this text. And for me, the problem is oftentimes they would have some really popular surnames, like, I don't know, Smith, and I would be sitting wondering, okay, what Smith is he referring to exactly? Especially if it's 16th century, I'll be like, okay, what Smith of 16th century is this guy exactly referring to? Why does he mention him? That was like my question about. Do you often have to do a background check on certain people who are mentioned in the original text?
Maybe in like my first or second year of studies, I used to really look for each of these like names or terms, but currently I have taken a different approach. So basically what I do is to maybe look up like within the text or within like the topics that we are studying this week, whether those names are really important to know. If I do not really see any point of looking up those names if they are not really essential for the discussion. For example, you are reading about like the industrialization maybe, and there was a certain person that I don't know was talking about railroads, some kind of engineer, I would say, but maybe his name is not so important to memorize, but maybe his argument is what really makes sense to know, or something along those lines, because looking up each name is actually takes a lot of time, and especially when you're reading history, it's really easy to get stuck on those like specific details, and I do not really recommend you to get so deep in them. So yeah, uh, I guess that is my question or answer. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Please, yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Currently I'm first year student and I'm taking this HST 100 course that everybody takes. And my question is about the writing the lectures. I mean, writing conspects for lectures. Do you have any, I don't know, advice for how we can make it more efficient? Because I just typically watch lectures and write down the stuff that's written on the slides or the stuff that lecturer says. So it's typically writing down everything, let's say, or some stuff that I find important. I just saw how you write it on computer, and I was like, God, that I'm really haven't seen something like this before. And what do you suggest for me and for the rest of people who just suffer with all of this writing down stuff? Is it better to write on computer or is it better to write on copybook? What do you think about this?
I'm sorry if I scared you a bit, because in the previous course that I was taking about history, the Soviet history, the lectures would usually last up to like hour and a half, and there was a lot of information. But now especially if your lectures are around like maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I usually like take a different approach, and let me like show you also. I'm currently taking also a history course, 300 level course about AIDS in society. And usually we have like 2 lectures, each around 15 minutes. And what I do is I just screenshot each each slide, because those slides usually contain a lot of like information, like main points, and they also contain details that would be really hard and long to write. So yeah, you just screenshot it, paste it, maybe even like crop it a bit to make it look less messy. And sometimes what I do is just I usually write after or maybe before each of the screenshots the main idea that was the professor saying about this slide. So let's say that the American Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a report about 5 men in Los Angeles. And what was not written here is that the beginning of the disease was in the 1950s, and about like Los Angeles, men from Los Angeles, it was actually here referring to like that homosexuals were the main like aim, especially in the first part of the like disease that was mainly studied those gay men, but also women, drug users, and hemophiliacs. And yeah, and also the discussion about whether it is better to write your lectures in the like electronic or hard copy. I usually recommend students to write it electronically, because first of all, when you write it electronically, it allows you to create a structure that is easily navigated. Let's say that you want to take a specific point from your second like week from like this specific lecture. Okay, you have taken it, but now you want to refer to like maybe the last lecture, and you can easily navigate here. Secondly, yeah, like mainly structure is what I like, is also ability to customize your lecture notes to make it prettier, use different fonts. And thirdly, when you're using electronic sources, you can always come back to your notes. And what I have usually found when I am writing notes on like hard copy and notebooks, I usually get them lost after some time, and I do not even look back. But electronic notes are always like available.
They are
I
portable,
guess.
right?
Yeah, and also they're portable. You can actually study your notes in whatever time you want, because why I usually mainly use Google Docs is that you can write your notes both on your computer, but if you are not home and you do not have a computer anywhere, you can just check it on your phone. It's also quite practical.
I got it. Would you mind if I show you my notes?
Yeah, of course. I would like to see it.
Hello, it's me.
Hello.
Look, so this is one for week 1, and you see this ridiculously lots of words. And yeah, my project is not good. So there are many of these things. So in my nature, I'm quite lazy, and I try to shorten the stuff. but I think your approach to notes is way more better than this. Thank you.
Yeah, but
Thank you for
actually
that.
I have a video tutorials that I watched recently is how to take notes on history lectures. Let me pass it to you because I think it would be a bit useful to kind of guess what I'm trying to do in my notes, electronic notes.
And yeah, and one more thing, you said about lectures of 15-20 minutes. Our lectures consist of 2 parts, 3 parts. And if you sum them up, they're like 1 hour, 1.5 hour lectures. And it's better to do this way, right? What do you say about like splitting the lectures like for different days? Am I not taking your time? I'm sorry. It's a little bit past the time, I think.
No, you can easily ask, or I guess I have some time to chat for the Q&A section. And actually passed you a like useful tutorial that I also used for my previous lectures in Titratki and also electronic versions. And what I mainly operate with is like not writing everything down, but writing in bullet points and using like specific structure. So you write a bullet point, then underneath you provide an evidence how the author tries to prove it. And underneath it, you can also provide an example, so like specific example of this evidence. So basically then you have a ready structure that you can always use. Yeah. Do you have other questions?
Yes, I have a question. I wanted to ask, so I'm taking the history course 100, and when we need to write response papers, we get these huge readings. And I wanted to ask, do you think it is better to read the given readings first and then see the bigger picture and then start writing, or read and write at the same time? So while you read for the first time, to just write the main points?
That's an interesting question. So what I usually do is just to maybe like the approach that I have showed you is just trying to grasp the main ideas of the text. So you do not have to memorize all those pieces of evidence, and yeah, you just read it and you like summarize it, maybe answer the questions provided in the text, or maybe you just create a small summary with like useful quotes, couple of quotes, and then you just write a response. So if you maybe you can actually try to experiment with my approach, and when I usually uh, use my technique, it takes me less than like maybe 20-30 minutes to write a response for the week. And yeah,
Oh,
it just
okay.
makes everything easier.
I was just about to ask you, like, how long does it take you to write the paper? Thank you.
Yeah. And also, if you need presentation, I can share it with you. Let me just copy it in the chat. You can also ask me other questions. I'm always available online. You can text me on Telegram or even book Telegram, or not Telegram, but Zoom meeting. Yeah, or maybe even write in Instagram and etc. Yeah. So do you have anything else? I guess not. Yeah, also about active students. You will receive your prizes a bit later.
Thank you for the presentation. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you for the presentation.